What's up, everybody? I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. And one time when I was in, seventh grade, I had this crush on this girl at camp, and she had a crush on me back, and it was awesome. It was a magical week. It's not like we went and did anything stupid or out of bounds. We just liked each other, and it was sweet and innocent and wonderful, and I loved the way that week felt. It was affirming in so many ways, and I felt like I'd really connected with somebody in a way that was unique, but we both knew that we lived way far away from each other. This is before cell phones, when you had to pay long distance fees to call somebody if they didn't live in your town. We're never going to see each other again, maybe next year at camp, but then everything will be different. And so as the week went along, those were just rich days, but there was this looming thing that as we traveled down the road toward Friday afternoon when our parents would come and pick us up and camp would be dismissed, it became more and more somber because we knew everything would change. And this will be something we can never recapture. And that's that. And I think, wow, was that the year Richard Marx put out Endless Summer Nights? This is all dawning on me in real time. I think it might have been. It just occurred to me. I think that Endless Summer Nights by Richard Marx, which is so sad. It's kind of the same theme as The Boys of Summer by Don Henley. The theme is like, oh, this is all going to go away, and it's so sad. And I have these nice memories of this thing that we knew couldn't last as we move toward autumn. I have always weirdly loved that song, despite it not being particularly good. And I think that's why. I think it's nostalgia for camp that year. This is crazy. We just had a breakthrough, you and me. This is an amazing, amazing thing. But if you can understand what it feels like to be in one of those kid crush moments where this time frame that's beyond your control is creeping up on you and it's all going to change, so you better enjoy the moment while you have it. If you get that, then you get the way the narrative of Matthew is shaping up as well. Not so much on the crush side, but on the relationship side. The relationship between Jesus and his disciples has been beautiful. It's incredibly honest, and it's up and down for the disciples as they're trying to figure out what's going on. It's meaningful. People's lives are being changed in unfathomable ways. These are the best 3 years of road trip that anybody has ever had in 3 years of companionship and road trip in the history of Earth. But they know that there is a town that is metaphorically my version of Friday at camp. There is a place that when we get there, it all changes. It's going to end. And they know that. One, because they know how the place is. It's Jerusalem, and Jerusalem means something. It's a political hotbed for a certain ideology. It's a place where movements like this go to die. Every little religious flare-up that had happened in living memory at the time that these events were unfolding, they all ended at the hands of the Romans or the Jewish religious leaders, and Jesus is taking his buddies directly toward the place that is like the headquarters of both of those groups. I mean, I guess the technical capital of Judea was in Capernaum, but the largest military concentration was here. I mean, Jerusalem is where it happened. So we know we're cruising toward the end of things as we get closer to Jerusalem because of those political cultural realities of the day. But as Matthew unfolds, we also figure out that we're heading toward the end of things, the end of this moment, the end of these endless summer nights, because Jesus has said, I'm going there to die. Like, that's exactly where I'm going. This is exactly what's going to happen. And even if he says, and on the third day, I'm going to be raised back to life, it's still like, well, I mean, how is exactly? It feels like things will be different once one of us has died and then comes back to life. I just don't think it'll be like the good old days when we went on that camping trip up north and the campfires and a lady came up. It's like, oh, help me, help me, help me. And we got all mad, but then you helped her anyway. It's all going to be different. And to you and me, we got to put in a little bit of work to understand the way Matthew is coupling the geographical flow of the road trip with the narrative flow of this whole thing coming to a head. But to the original audience, it would have been super obvious. They would have had this geography completely on lockdown, even if these weren't trips they made. Everybody knew way up north in Galilee, it's nice and it's green and it's pastoral. The Sea of Galilee sits in this little basin at the base of all of these big, beautiful green hills, and it's a simple place with relatively low stakes, but as the story moves closer to Jerusalem, we're dropping dramatically in elevation as we dip down into that Jordan Rift Valley, which is this massive geographic feature that runs all the way down into eastern central Africa. And I think that Rift Valley right there where Jesus is traveling is the lowest point in that entire rift. I think it's the lowest point on earth, right? Is the Dead Sea, Jericho, that area? I don't know. I should probably have prepared and asked that question. But I think if it's not the lowest, it's at least really close to the lowest. It is several hundred feet, almost 1,000 feet, if I recall correctly, below sea level as you are coming into Jericho. I was there a couple of years ago and marveled at how far down below the Mediterranean Sea, which is just out of eyeshot. Like, I'm below that entire ocean level of the planet by a skyscraper's height. This is insane. I digress. The relevant passages here in Matthew 20 to this geographical unfolding are verse 17, where it says, "Now as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, he took the 12 disciples aside and he said to them, we're going to Jerusalem, we're going to get killed," and all of that business, as we've already discussed. But the two key geographical notes from that little verse that I just read you is what we've been talking about, how Jerusalem is going to be the end game where everything changes, but also this language of going up. It seems to be both physical and spiritual language to say we're going up to Jerusalem. And when I say I'm going up, I mean North Dakota or Canada. If you live in Texas, you don't say, I'm going down to Oklahoma. You go up to Oklahoma because our brain maps and our physical maps are oriented north. So if you go north, you're going up. If you go south, you're going down. That doesn't seem to be the case here. And even the notion of maps that we have today, the orientation was very different back in the day. This would be a fun thing to do a video on sometime. Maybe I will. They had maps that were entirely oriented around Jerusalem as the centerpiece of everything. And it takes a while to get oriented and figure it out the way they used to do maps in the classical world and in the medieval world. But once you figure it out, you're like, oh yeah, they were looking at the same thing I am. It's just not as neat and tidy as up is north, down is south. So it would be anachronistic to imagine that when it says, now as Jesus was going up to Jerusalem, that anybody would have taken that to mean, oh, he was going north because north is up. It looks like the more natural way to read this is that people would say up because elevation-wise, Jerusalem was almost always up. I think Jerusalem is, again, why would I not just Google this stuff before we do this? Hang on a second. Jerusalem is 2,500-ish feet above sea level, which means it goes up pretty quick from the Mediterranean Sea because it's only a few miles from the coast. So to go to Jerusalem is always going to be to go up because the city sits on this hill. And further, if you're going up from Jericho, then you are really going up to Jerusalem from Jericho. In the same way that if you are familiar at all with Colorado geography, sorry, I know not everybody's from there, it's the best I got. You would never say, like, I'm going down to Breckenridge if you're in Denver. Like, even though Breckenridge isn't north of Denver, it's west. And so normally you say you go out west and back east. You maybe would say I'm going out to Breckenridge, but the more natural thing would be to say I'm going up to Breckenridge because of how much you go up in elevation. And it's just the natural trajectory of the trip. I'm going on and on. You get the idea here. Of course, the other meaning of up that is probably implicit to this popular phrase going up to Jerusalem is just the spiritual significance. This is the city of God. This is where all the important stuff is happening. This is where the temple is at. So you are going up in the same sense that Moses was going up to have an encounter with God, up onto the mountain, up to approach the place where God lives. So all of that's rattling around in the heads of the original audience, and some stuff happens with James and John and their mom and all of that. And then we come back to the travel itinerary in verse 29, and it says, as Jesus and his disciples were leaving Jericho, a large crowd followed him. Oh, okay. So this is the whole thing that we've been looking at the last couple of days. But the original audience would be like, oh, wow, they went through Jericho. I mean, man, you're going to feel it in those calves on the trip up to Jerusalem if that's where you're going next, because Jericho is literally like the hardest place to walk up to Jerusalem from. You're looking at the better part of 1,000 feet below sea level in Jericho, and then you're going to travel less than 20 miles as the crow flies, and in that time, you're going to go up the better part of 4,000 feet, 3,700, 3,800, something like that. That's massive. That's like going from the plains as you drive up to the Black Hills to see Mount Rushmore, all the way up to the very, very highest point in all of the Black Hills, the tippy top of Black Elk Peak. So I can picture, I've seen what that kind of elevation gain is like, and I'm sure you have as well. And these folks don't have the aid of motorized vehicles. They're doing this whole thing on foot. So one more maybe visual that would come to mind for the person who's reading this and is familiar with the geography would be that in a way, Jesus is going through an ordeal to get to Jerusalem. He's working to go to Jerusalem. The natural place to go would not be there. That's the toughest walk you could pick coming out of Jericho. But still, as Luke puts it, Jesus is resolutely setting his face toward Jerusalem, and that's the way he's going to go. And when we pick it up next time around in chapter 21, Friday afternoon and the parents picking everybody up is going to arrive. It's over. That's it for the endless summer nights. We are into Jerusalem, and indeed, everything is going to come to a head. Everything is going to change. Thanks again to all of you who make the podcast happen by supporting the thing at patreon.com/the TMBH podcast. I don't know, you're awesome, and I can't say thank you enough times, so I'm saying it again. Looking forward to doing more of this next time around. I'm Matt. This is the 10-Minute Bible Hour podcast. Let's do this again soon.
Endless summer night.